She is a marketer, a writer, a business leader. She's actually the founder and CEO of Red Branch Media. I think you guys will be definitely excited to hear her story, as well as she has a couple of other guests who will be joining her. So, without further ado, Maren Hogan.
I'm not entirely sure why Maren Hogan, which is like, is hard, but that's okay. I'm here today to talk about breaking down barriers to finding exceptional talent. I'll never forget it. I was sitting at the pool at Caesar's Palace, and my friend Eric were just hanging out, and he was asking me what he was always asking me, which was, hire me. Why don't you hire me? No matter where I was, if I was building a travel conference, hire me. If I was starting an HR community, hire me. And now I had this fledgling marketing consulting firm, which is Red Branch Media today. He was always there telling me, by my chaise lounge, why he's the right guy for the job. But I didn't really see it that way. He didn't have any experience in my industry, this industry, our industry. His only management experience was in a coffee shop. He didn't have a college degree. His knowledge of social media was basically taking selfies of his emo bangs at the time. This was kind of a long time ago. He was a great friend, but he was not the person that I thought I needed to grow my business at that time. But the reason for that is that I was caught in a web of our own making. I believed all the things that we tell ourselves as finders and seekers of talent. Like that degrees matter. I mean, maybe they do if you're recruiting doctors or lawyers. That management of a coffee shop is somehow less than or worse than hiring and managing a white-collar team. That skills must come with the candidates, and training is a waste of our time. That passive candidates are the only candidates worth having. That people with a criminal record don't belong in our organization or have anything to offer us. That a single area of expertise locks one out of all others. And that the people who want to work for us must follow the same boring, archaic rules that we had to follow when we were looking for work. But those rules don't apply anymore. Not for progressive employers. And if you decide to take my challenge and challenge the people around you, and the challenge that SmartRecruiters is implicitly endorsing by having this session up here, not for you. Okay, so you might know, if you're one of the 2 people that I know in the audience, maybe 3, that this story has a happy ending. I said yes to the request. Eric not only became my very first employee, he's now a partner at Red Branch Media. His ability to hire hardworking baristas at the coffee shop ended up making him the perfect person to hire and interview all of the people that we need at Red Branch Media. His ability to manage multiple things, making the schedule, there's a line 10 deep, everybody wants a candy bar latte, and the cashier called in sick. That makes managing our clients an actual breeze for him. His persistence with me to get what he wanted is actually paying off in great dividends for any vendor that dares to disappoint him. I get discounts all the time, it's fantastic. His story isn't that unique, though. It's not that unique at Red Branch, and not for our clients. Because the rules are wrong, and they're kind of stupid, actually. I started to realize that hiring is what we make it. We can choose to shift the focus in our organizations. We can tell our hiring managers, or the persons doing our skills and competencies, to chuck that useless MBA requirement. We can tell our recruiters that you and every single other woman that you know hates the phrase, work hard, play hard. It's up to you. So, as a marketer, I use personas all the time, right? Red Branch personas are way beyond like the 6 to 8 demographic, 4 points that people put together when they think of personas. We don't think that demographics like education, age, where you're from are not important. We just know that that's not enough. So, you may have noticed it's a candidate's war out there, or it's a candidate's market out there. I know everybody's eyes roll back in their heads when I say the phrase war for talent, right? It's totally overused. But there's a reason I say it, and a lot of other people do too. See, I've fought hard for every single person in my organization to get their endurance working for my team, to secure their success, to get their ambition driving our team forward. Make fun of the phrase war for talent all you want to. That doesn't mean it's not true. Right now, today, I'm in the middle of several battles. There is the Midwestern city that's trying to make itself a hub for tech talent and competing with Silicon Valley and New York and Chicago for talent. There is the huge pharmaceutical company in the Midwest who's trying to compete with folks on the coast and finding that their employer branding just isn't as jazzy as they wanted it to be and having trouble. There's the North Carolina town where this employer is looking for employees every single month. It's riddled with addiction, the hours are long, it's difficult, and they have over a 10% attrition rate per month. What do all these recruitment challenges that I just listed have in common? Well, first of all, we've solved them. And second of all, we did it with personas. Every successful campaign that we started for those companies was built with personas. We use them to figure out what talent is going to do next, what they're watching, what they're reading, what bar they're going to be at, what radio station they're listening to. We use them to get them to attend a job fair, pick up the phone when a recruiter calls, have them consider my client to be an employer of choice, or go across the country on a chance that this might be the perfect job for them. Personas change the game because they're about a person. See, one of the things that's so funny is we talk about interviewees and candidates and applicants and passive ones and active ones. We forget that we're trying to find a person here. So, how do we build personas? Well, it's not really that much harder than what you probably already do. So we start with what I call our forensics files. We ask around inside of our company, and we say, how did you get here? What made you decide to come to this company? Why did you take the chance on this organization? Where were you in your life when you did? What is your background? And this can be really helpful whether you're talking to successful applicants or maybe not so successful hires. You kind of want to know what maybe not to do as well, and personas can help you do that. Figure out all of those and see the thread that runs through them, why they applied, where they were, what brought them to you, what about your culture or benefits or whatever attracted them. So that's the basis for your profile. Then you want to put your future employee in the situation that they're in today. So I always imagine it like I'm writing a screenplay, right? So what are they doing right now? Is it the single mom who doesn't know how she's going to manage now that the daycare down the street closed and she might be looking for more flexible hours? Is it a young man who's really frustrated because there's no succession plan at his company and he knows his next step has to be upward? Is your perfect candidate out there somewhere but frustrated and stymied and completely overwhelmed by your applicant tracking system? The number one question to ask yourself is what keeps them up at night? From a professional aspect, what is making them stress out? And then find out if your company can solve that. Can you solve it with work flex benefits or a ban-the-box measure or an SMS recruiting campaign, better benefits, job sharing, removing a superfluous degree requirement? There are lots of things that you can do. Now, finally, if you can answer the question about what is keeping them up at night, use your common sense. If you know what your best people look like, and you know what your candidate is struggling with, then you can start to fill in the details. So go to LinkedIn or whatever professional network you think is good for what you're recruiting for. Look at their history. Look at their habits. What are their skills? Obviously, you know to look what school did they come from or what position did they hold before, but what influencers are they following? What types of articles do they share? How do they interact in the wild, so to speak? This is a window into who they are. If you understand this, you're going to understand everything you need to understand to build out your personas. Once you've built personas, they can influence everything from the ad copy on your career site, or the web copy on your career site, to your recruitment ads. Everything from your funding deck down to the plain text emails that you're sending personally to each applicant. So you won't turn down someone who could impact your company from an executive level simply because she has a record, like Shelley. You won't overlook an amazing, skilled operations executive simply because he doesn't have relevant experience in your industry, like Rob. And you won't lose out on amazing candidates who can build a viral marketing campaign and blow everyone away with free, awesome PR for your company before she's even hired, like Nina. I can guarantee you that any of these people would not have made it through the applicant tracking system. In fact, I know some of them didn't. And if they did, each one had something in their lives that made them not a top candidate. You see, personas expose you to talent you'd never have dreamt. In a war for talent, where intellectual capital is the differentiator and our people are the differentiator, where innovation is a secret weapon, that's how you win. Now, to illustrate my point in a way that nothing that I say ever could, let's meet some of these out-of-the-box candidates. Next up, Shelley Winner.
Thank you. Wow, this is so cool. Thank you guys for coming out to hear my story today. So I'm here to share my story with all of you in hopes to break the stigma that comes along with hiring people with criminal histories, and to also bring hope to those that are lost or struggling with addiction. My story is a story about change, and I believe that we all make mistakes, but we all have the power to change. And what if you were known for the worst thing that you've done? Now I want to ask the audience a question, and you don't have to answer it, but I appreciate your honesty. How many of you have ever been arrested? All right, thank you for the few hands that are, thank you. I have another question. How many of you have ever done something where you should have been arrested, maybe drinking and driving, but didn't? Raise your hand. Ah, we got a lot of naughty people in the audience. Well, thank you. And here's a photo of me right after my arrest. Doesn't even look like me. I weighed 118 pounds, and I was on meth, heroin, and prescription pills. I was so caught up in this life that I started selling drugs to support my habit, and eventually I got caught, landing me a 4-year federal prison sentence. I grew up with my dad in and out of prison most of my life for drugs and alcohol. At the age of 11, he got me drunk for the very first time. I remember living with him in high school and people coming in and out of our house at all hours of the night buying drugs from him. And I remember finding pipes used to smoke methamphetamines in the cupboards and the drawers in the bathroom. So it's no wonder that I followed in his footsteps, because statistics say that 70% of children do follow in their parents' footsteps. Shortly after my arrest, very, very shortly after my arrest, I found out I was pregnant. This was quite the awakening for me, a huge, huge turning point in my life. And at that moment, I knew that if I didn't change my ways and turn my life around, that my son wasn't going to have a chance. I'm also a very spiritual person, and I do believe in God. And I knew I needed to get right with Him, and I knew that I was going to need His strength to get through this time. So while I was still out fighting my case, I enrolled myself into a faith-based recovery program called Teen Challenge. Now this is the little card that we had made when I was there. It's a little prayer card. I'm very pregnant right there, as you can see. While still in the program, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. Yes, that's him at 10 months, and the picture on the right is just recent. And I am so grateful to have a mother that stepped up and kept my son from going into foster care. She has done an amazing job with raising him, and her love and support are a huge contributing factor to my success today. And my mom, she's sitting out here in the audience today. Yay. Love you, Mom. Thank you. So there's a picture of her when she would bring him to visit me in prison. So 2 months later, excuse me, I had to turn myself in to start my prison sentence at Dublin Federal Correctional Institution, just right across the bay. Now, prison wasn't as bad as I expected. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not ever want to go back. But it offered a lot of classes and programs that allowed me to change my life. And while I was there, I focused a lot of energy on becoming a better person. One of the programs that I was very fortunate in doing was called Defy Ventures. Now, Defy Ventures is an entrepreneurship and leadership training program that teaches people to transform their hustle that got them into prison into something that's legal and positive. One of the most valuable things that Defy taught me was to not give up when faced with fear, and to keep pushing forward, to silence those self-limiting thoughts and those self-limiting beliefs, like I'm not good enough or I'm not smart enough. And that it's okay to have fear. It's part of life. And instead of letting it cripple me like I had done so many times in the past, it taught me to learn to dance with it, embrace it. So at the end of this competition, I had to do a Shark Tank style competition in front of all these CEOs of major corporations, Google execs, venture capitalists. It was probably one of the most nerve-wracking days of my life, besides today. But I'm proud to say that I walked away victorious, landing first place in that competition. And during that whole event, I met an incredible woman by the name of Dee Towery, who saw something in me, and she told me that she wanted to be my mentor when I was released from prison. Now, Dee owns one of the fastest growing businesses, tech companies in the Bay Area, and called Proactive Business Solutions, and she's also known as the most influential woman in Bay Area business. So when I got released from prison, she contacted me through Defy Ventures and set up a lunch date with me. And during this lunch date, she told me that she believed in me and that she wanted to help me in any way that she could. And she offered me a job with her company that day. She has truly helped me get to where I am today. Another great program that I was very fortunate to do, but this time it was outside of the prison walls, it's Code Tenderloin. Code Tenderloin helps people with criminal histories like me, or people who are homeless, break into the tech world. They teach job readiness skills like how to write a resume, how to interview. They took me on various field trips to places like Microsoft, LinkedIn, Twitter. And while I was at one of these major tech companies, A woman that worked there told me that they were hiring and that I should apply. So I did. And a week later, I got a call back with a scheduled interview. Code Tenderloin had me doing so many mock interviews, and I hated it at the time, but I'm so grateful for it, that by the time I actually went in for the real interview, I nailed it, and I got hired right there on the spot. Unfortunately, after they learned of my criminal history, they rescinded that job offer. That was a very, very hard moment for me. And I know at this point that a lot of people probably would have just given up, but I didn't. And if it's one thing that Defy Ventures taught me, it's not to give up and to fight for what you want. So I wrote this company a letter, and I explained my conviction. But more importantly, I explained what I had done to change my life and what I had done to rehabilitate myself, and why they should give me a second chance. And you know what? They did. They decided to open their doors and offer me employment. It was one of the most pivotal and amazing moments of my life, because here I was, fresh out of prison, and now working for one of the biggest tech companies in the world. I had broken past those barriers that so many people with criminal histories face. And this was an opportunity that I was going to take and run with. And so this tech company has been really good to me. It's honestly the best job I've ever had. And I was speaking with the HR lady that decided to open these doors for me and give me this chance. And I told her, I said, listen, I know you're leery. I know you're leery about hiring me. I get it. But I assure you, you're not going to regret this decision. And that I am going to bust my ass. And I said that to her word for word. And 2 months later, I was voted MVP. 6 months after that, I got a big promotion, beating out 7 other applicants, 2 of which had been there for years. And a month after that, I was hand-selected by all of my management team to go on a special trip to headquarters called Impact. But I want to even share something more spectacular than that, is that this company has such a growth mindset that they have now changed their hiring practices here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Pretty amazing. Each year, more than 650,000 people are released from prisons or jails. And that's a lot of people. But many companies are unwilling to hire these people because of stigmas or assumptions. Like, maybe they're going to think they're going to be unethical. Maybe they might harass their coworkers. How about less competent? Untrustworthy is a big one. I remember facing that one. Or maybe they lack social or professional skills. But I want to ask all of you guys another question. How true do you really think these assumptions are? And I hope that by sharing my story today, you can clearly see that these assumptions aren't always true. And that by offering an ex-offender a chance can be a very rewarding experience for both parties. If you knew that the only way you could survive is if you worked really hard, would you do it? I think you would. I did. And that's what people with criminal histories face every single day. We know that we don't have a lot of opportunities in the job market. So when we are given that opportunity, we're very grateful. And we go above and beyond expectations to show that gratitude. There have been studies, I don't have any slides on it, but there are studies that have been proven that people with criminal histories perform just as well, if not better, than people who don't. If these people don't get hired, what do you think the chances of them going back are? Probably pretty high. So I think that we should help our communities by opening our minds, expanding our horizons, and let's get rid of these stigmatizations, and let's give people a fair second chance to get their lives back in order. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. God bless.
It's a tough story to follow, but aren't we all glad that Shelley didn't give up? I'm Robert Coombs. I split my time, half of it working with companies, many of them here today, and half of my time as the chief operating officer of a company called The Class by Taryn Toomey. We're a small but rapidly growing company in the women's fitness and lifestyle space. You see the team up here, and I know what you're thinking. You look at the team and you think, culture fit. This guy definitely knows women's fitness and lifestyle. Well, it turns out I was sort of an unexpected candidate. The way that I got this job is actually rather unremarkable in the world of recruiting. In fact, there was a venture capitalist who knew the company and who knew me, knew the work that I had done, some of which I'm going to tell you about a little bit later. And he reached out to them, said, you should hire him. He reached out to me, said, you should go work for them. And that's it, right? Just good old-fashioned networking and matchmaking. None of the fancy technologies that we're talking about here at this conference, not on the candidate side and not on the employer side. So I actually just tweeted this question a little bit earlier. I'm going to ask the question here. How many people here in the room got their current job primarily because of networking? And here we are. Let's just keep that in mind for the rest of this conference, because here we are talking about the technologies that make online applications better, right? And make it easier for you to process all of those online applications. Well, that's the story I'm kind of here to talk about. Not how I got that job, but how I applied to 3,000 jobs, actually significantly more than that, using the very technologies that we're talking about here. And I didn't get any of them. So one more candidate sort of slips through the filters. Now, it turns out about a year ago, I decided I was going to leave my career in politics and the nonprofit world. I'd built web, IT, government affairs, editorial, and PR teams, all of them from the ground up. But now there were proper experts in those teams. And so the only thing that was left to do was get out of the way. But with that kind of a background, with that executive experience, I figure my chances in the job market have got to be pretty okay. So I tidied up my resumes, and I hit the job boards. I lurked and lingered on the career pages of companies that I admire. I leapt at any opportunity that seemed like a good fit at companies like Google and Facebook and Slack. You guys know the drill. It's resume, cover letter, wait. Resume, cover letter, wait. I did this over and over, and then I started to expand my search because I wasn't really hearing much back. So I expanded the search to companies that were still interesting to me, but maybe not quite as competitive, thinking that maybe I'd have a better shot at it. Resume, cover letter, wait. I repeated the process over and over and over again. It seemed like hundreds of times. It was probably only dozens. But even though I have an abundance of confidence, at some point, when you apply to enough jobs and you don't hear anything back, or you get nothing but automated responses, you have to start asking yourself, is there something wrong with me? I've got some good friends in recruiting, and they were very kind to me at this sort of low point and said, actually, it's not you. In all likelihood, you're probably being filtered out by applicant tracking systems. And they sort of explained these to me, and you all know that these applicant tracking systems can range from something that resembles a fancy spreadsheet all the way up to very sophisticated black box systems that have filters and automation, look through all of a candidate's information for keywords and work experience. But in essence, we're basically talking about an algorithm that parses candidates based on rules. And in my limited experience, I started thinking about these like robots. So those robots follow rules. And in some cases, I was being filtered out because I just wasn't the best candidate for the job. Good job, robot. That's what you're supposed to do. But in some cases, I was being filtered out because those rules were set up to filter someone like me out, even if it wasn't intentional. In particular, my colleagues sort of explained to me that my background as a career non-profiteer made me somewhat unattractive a candidate in these private sector searches. As non-profiteers, we often have different titles than in the private sector. We don't have sales figures to brag about, and we're not seen as competitors, and so the keywords that might be built into these algorithms would never be showing up in my resume. So as a result, I might be one of the types of people that a company needs while simultaneously being the type of person that their algorithm is built to filter out. So they went on to explain the ways in which the system was stacked against me. And in some cases, these are perfectly fair reasons. You had leaders in their field that I was competing against, right? So my resume isn't going to jump on top of theirs. And at the same time, recruiters are receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of applications to many of these senior level jobs. So again, I have a very, very steep hill to climb. And in those cases, it's no wonder that the recruiters are using technology to manage piles and piles of applicants. Now, I could try to trick those systems by sneaking keywords into my resume. But by the time I had started to learn all of this stuff, I decided this wasn't just about me getting my foot in the door. And as a guy who likes to build things, sometimes likes to break things so that I can rebuild them in ways that work better, this was beginning to become an appealing project. So I did the only reasonable thing I could think of. I figured, if you all are going to use a robot to filter me out, I was going to use a robot to force my way in. I've heard people here talk about the war for talent. But as you all are increasing your arsenal of technology, so are candidates. We're stockpiling too. And I just figured I'd be the guy that shows up to the resume fight with a robot. So I built this Rube Goldbergian contraption of web crawlers and spreadsheets and scripts. It was a bit ugly, but it was meant to automate my job search process. It would search the web for jobs that I'd be interested in, and then it would build a cover letter that was customized to that job and personalized to the hiring manager. It submitted these applications online, or it sent in applications over email in batches, and had tracking mechanisms built in so that I could see when an email was opened, when someone read my resume, or when someone clicked to view my LinkedIn profile. It was in no way elegant, but it was ruthlessly efficient. In fact, the first time I spun it up, I walked across the street to get a cup of coffee, and I came back to find that I had inadvertently applied to more than 1,300 jobs in the Midwest. Now, I live in New York. Any of you that were doing talent searches last year in the Midwest, I apologize. I may have been some of the noise in your signal. So I refined the system in order to make sure that it was running a little bit more effectively for me. In fact, I tested submitting through job sites, directly to email to hiring managers. I experimented with different subject lines, versions of my resume, different cover letters. I designed this robot to adjust and optimize as many different variables as possible for each and every job, just like an applicant might, one application at a time. Surely, this would be infinitely more effective than I was, right? This is a robot doing the thing that I was doing manually. And hopefully that would help to tilt the deck back in my favor. But it turns out that after thousands of applications had gone out, I saw no better results than when I was doing it manually. No better, just like lots more. That's a lot of silence to hear. So I continued to run these A/B tests using subtle and not so subtle changes in language and design. It seemed like nothing made a difference. It turns out the old-fashioned way of applying with a resume and a thoughtful cover letter just seemed too tilted against a non-traditional candidate like me, someone who was an outsider. By this time, I decided this probably wasn't going to be the way that I got my job, but it was a really good opportunity to see just how broken this system is. So I decided to just throw the game and see what happens. I applied with a very normal-looking cover letter. You can imagine each of those variables filled in for the job that I was applying to. And then I contrasted that with a cover letter that admits right in the second sentence that it's being submitted by a robot. Now, that second letter should perform either a lot better or a lot worse than the first. Right? Someone should be looking at that and thinking like, hey, I like the cut of this guy's jib, we should hire him. Or they should be thinking, who the heck does this guy think he is, applying to a job with a robot, get rid of him. In my case, I didn't care which of those responses I elicited, I just wanted to know if anyone was listening at all. And so far as I could tell from this experiment and others like it, the answer is nobody reads cover letters. Not even your robots. People in this room notwithstanding, of course. I'm sure you're reading plenty of them. But around this time, I wrote an article about this project. It was in Fast Company. It elicited a very, very divided response. I had hundreds of other applicants reach out to me to tell me about their similar experiences, to share their frustrations. I also had a lot of recruiters reach out, an opinionated bunch. They said they fell into one of two camps. They either said, listen, I've never used one of these automated filters you're talking about. I read every single resume, and you don't know what you're talking about, so you should shut up. Okay, that last part was actually louder, but there's another group of recruiters who actually spoke up and said, yeah, I have used these filters, and sometimes they don't work the way that we would like them to, and oftentimes very interesting candidates slip through. Let me help you to understand just why this problem exists. So one of those recruiters explained to me, this is someone from Spotify, who said they get between 300 and 350,000 applicants per year. This is a relatively small company compared to many of the big companies that are here. So is it any wonder that they have to rely on the technology to process all of those applicants? And how do I, as a candidate, rise to the top of such a steep pile? Another told me that 80 to 90% of their senior jobs are never even posted. These are the jobs that I was applying for. So how do I rise to the top of a pile that I don't know about? Still others told me that their companies post jobs on the web, but they only consider referrals. Glad that I applied to that job. And many of those companies are hiring as many as 30 to 50% of their new candidates from those referrals. In fact, referrals are more than 4 times as likely to be hired than a non-referred candidate. Some people told me their dirty little secrets. One person said, I don't even look at people that apply to jobs anymore. I only consider people I find hunting on LinkedIn. Again, it's a bummer that I was spending my time applying to those jobs. And one other told me that a colleague routinely posted non-existent senior-level jobs on all of the websites just to get a pipeline of candidates that were ready to be poached. They kept posting the same jobs over and over and over again, gathering hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants' information, despite not having the promised position. So I was applying to jobs that don't exist, trying to squeeze through filters that were built to keep me out, and I'm competing with candidates who worked for their competitors or who were friends with their applicants, with their employees. So what is a smart recruiter to take from this kind of a story? Well, first, we need to remember that anything that promises more candidates may not be working for you, and it's certainly not working for me. The sheer volume of applicants that recruiters have to consider, coupled with measures like time to fill or cost of acquisition, may force you into an efficiency mode that forecloses opportunities for very interesting candidates that you would otherwise be able to see. So my challenge, the thing that I'm interested in now, is what if we, both as candidates and as recruiters, aimed for fewer candidates? What if we made sure that every single job posting was more authentic and that every single application was worthy of the time and energy it took to submit? What if we backed off in the arms race in the war for talent? I'm now what you might consider a recruiting hobbyist. I get to speak at conferences like this. I've been working with dozens of recruiting tech companies, some of them here today. I've learned about the gap between the type of candidate that a company is looking for, a company needs, and the way that they train their algorithms to look for those candidates. The gap in between, that's where the opportunity is. I've taken this approach and I'm working on ideas for algorithms that are built to help find those few needles in a haystack without regard to the data biases that we inject into these workflows, whether they're biased against a career non-profiteer like me or other groups. Because at the end of the day, for a group like this, we have to remember, sorry, that's the wrong slide. Yeah, we have to remember, for some of us, we are who our robots hire. And I think we can do better. Thank you.
All right. Are we still excited?
Guys.
Well, good, because we have one more amazing story to talk about. So I'm going to sit and we're going to have a quick conversation with Nina, and she's going to tell us about her crazy story as a standout applicant. All right? So Nina.
Hey, Lamar.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
We spent like a lot of time on the phone chatting, and I'm
did.
still having like processed the whole way that you did this, but I think it's awesome. So tell everyone a little bit about your story, and you're a standout applicant.
So I come from the Middle East. I decided to move out to the Bay Area about 4 years ago after spending nearly 10 years building my career in Jordan and across the Middle East. And when I made that decision, most of my friends and family said, you know, you're going to one of the most competitive markets, and it's going to take you a while. And I thought, I got this. A while. I can spend, 6 months emotionally, financially, mentally budgeted for around 6 months. And I got here and I started networking and applying to jobs and, did what most people do when they're trying to find work. And after about a year's time, I realized that I was no further in the process than when I first got here. And so I faced a choice of either giving up or trying to find a way to really break through very quickly. And what I did at that point was I sort of switched gears mentally, and I thought of myself, I'm a marketer by experience, and I thought, okay, if I'm considering myself to be a product, I need to build some demand around hiring me. So how do I sort of flip the script where rather than me chasing a lot of these opportunities that either don't exist, are going to networks that people are more familiar with, or a number of things that I wasn't even aware could be or could not be happening to my resume at the time. How about I flip the script and get companies to have some interest in hiring me?
Sounds like a plan.
And that's what I essentially did, yeah. So I created this website called Nina for Airbnb. I was very interested in working with Airbnb at the time. I think they're a fantastic company. Obviously, they've got a lot of international recognition. from a sort of career perspective, it seemed to make a lot of sense. And from a marketing perspective, it made even more sense because I knew that they were one of the few companies that the tech world and tech PR was just fantastically interested in. So anything that was happening around them would just sort of, by default of it being Airbnb, generate a lot of attention. And one of the biggest challenges that I had coming out of the Middle East was that, or perceived challenges, was that people thought my background wasn't necessarily relevant. They weren't familiar with the company that I had co-founded there. They weren't familiar with a lot of the clients that I had worked with. And so I thought, well, I know the Middle East so well as a market, and I know this company so well as a consumer. How about instead of looking at these two things in a vacuum, I combine them and I show them how they could strategically enter the market and take advantage of a lot of missed opportunity there. And so that's what the report and the website concentrated on, was looking at the Middle East as a potential market for Airbnb to grow into. And I tweeted it to the founders, who luckily at that time were not oversaturated with a lot of conversation on Twitter. That generated an instant conversation, which generated a lot of sort of periphery conversations where people thought, oh my goodness, she just got in touch with the CEO of this huge company instantly. How did this happen, and what's going on? And then that sort of just picked up from there, and within a few days had just kind of exceeded all of my marketing expectations and spread across the world, and created a lot of buzz around hiring me. So yeah, that was exciting.
So you got in touch with the CEO, and then how did that go?
Within a couple of days, the interview process officially began. So a year after moving to the Bay Area, I had my dream. I was interviewing with one of the companies that I was more than excited to work for. I had a lot of inbound conversations that had started as well with a lot of other companies. And I thought, I'm right there. I'm close to the finish line. This is so exciting. And then I got that phone call of, thank you, you're great, but we don't have a role that fits right now.
So you did this entire online marketing campaign for a company that you don't work for. Mm-hmm. You interviewed and you talked to the CEO, and then you didn't even get hired.
Yeah, so I was crushed.
Yeah.
And
rightfully so.
More than just being crushed, I was also really nervous because at this point I had so many people that were asking me what's happening. And I thought, okay, if I tell them I didn't get the job, there's going to be all this assumption about me. At this point, she got their attention. She's having these conversations. She must have something in her background, or she must not be doing something correctly. So I kept that kind of very private until I was ready to say to companies, this is the company that I've ended up with. And so it kind of wrapped up as a really nice story, because ultimately I ended up with a fantastic company called Upwork, which is one of the, I think, best companies to be working for in the Bay Area at this stage right now, especially.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think not the funny thing, but the great thing is that you didn't give up, right? You just continued to use your brand as your weapon, right? You created this brand for a company that you didn't work for, which I think is absolutely crazy. I know as a recruiter, I would have been like, okay, let's interview her quickly, right? And then you didn't get the job, and then you ended up, though, building your own brand and making it amazing, and then using it to go to the next opportunity. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of a great thing between all of you standout applicants, right? Like, you all never gave up.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge you on one thing there.
Okay.
You just said that as a recruiter, you would want to have that conversation with me. And one of the things that I discovered in this experience was that it was nearly impossible to get those conversations started with recruiters because of things that exist that I wasn't even aware of. So a lot of the technology around recruiting means that you will ultimately end up with fantastic hires, no doubt, because you are looking at people, especially in some of these bigger companies that are more well-known, that have a lot of these inbound requests coming in from fantastically talented people to work there. But what's missing in this process is a lot of the people that either don't necessarily know how to sell themselves, don't get the best of their work on the resume, but also I think we are kind of shortchanging ourselves because most of us look at resumes as sort of this holy grail of figuring out what their experience will tell us about their future. Whereas I think resumes are fantastic in telling us, not fantastic. If done well, resumes can be really good at telling us what candidates have accomplished in the past, but they're not necessarily linked to the value that they can bring to your individual company or even the predicted future value that, that an employee could potentially bring with them.
That is an excellent way to look at that. Yeah, I completely agree with you. So you're happy now, and we're doing good, and you still got your personal brand.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good, this is awesome. Well, I'm sure there's tons of questions for you, and probably some for the rest of our standout applicants. So I say we invite everyone back on the stage and open up for some questions.
Sure.
And go from there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for telling your story.
Absolutely.
Come on, back up. So I personally want to thank you all. I think all of your stories were amazing and kind of resonated with me, especially, and I'm sure they've resonated with a lot of people in the audience. So we're going to open this up to questions. They're going to come around with some microphones. Who's ready to go? Who's the first question?
This is a question for Shelley.
Hi.
Hi. I'm curious, what are the ways for companies who want to open up employment opportunities for formerly incarcerated people? What can they do?
What can they do? They can take look at the person's skill set rather than their criminal history. Look at what they have to offer. Get to know interview them. Get to know their personality type before you just assume that they're not going to be a good fit with your company.
Would it be possible for companies that were interested in making a change to maybe work with some of the organizations that you mentioned? Could they reach out to them and possibly build a pipeline that way?
Absolutely. Code Tenderloin and Defy Ventures. Those are two great companies that help people break into the tech worlds. And that's how I got into with one of the biggest tech companies. And thank God that San Francisco has the ban the box, or I think all of California does. And so I didn't automatically get ruled out when I turned in my resume, which is really nice. And I got to go through the interview, and she actually got to see my personality, and that's why she liked me, and she hired me right there on the spot. So
Love that.
yeah.
Nice.
Hi, this is a question for Robert. So in the section around the bots, one thing you mentioned that you felt recruiters were basically taking your resume, putting it into whatever system they were using and running sort of a keyword search on that. Then this feels like a really cold way of looking at resumes. Yet, looking into the future, we have all of these technologies, machine learning, AI, that's coming out. Do you have any kind of advice or thoughts about how to, and this is going to be even more of a black box, but do you have any advice on how to make that a better experience for candidates?
Yeah, this might be a little bit counterintuitive, but the guy who's up here saying that bots break the process actually has a ton of confidence in the ability to use technology to solve this. I think part of the problem in many cases is that we have people who are not trained to fundamentally understand the systems that they're using, the implications of including this piece of data or that piece of data, or the different variables that they're playing around with, just how much those cleave data sets. And so it's a little tough. I think that we need to think about better training in recruiting to understand the actual technology that's at use. I'm not saying that you all need computer science degrees. I don't have one. But certainly understanding the raw power of a Boolean search is something that could give you a little bit more insight into the types of candidates that you might be ruling out, even though you might actually want to have a conversation with them.
Nice. Thank you.
Hi, question for everybody who wants to answer. I'm really curious now that you have been successful in your search for jobs, and congratulations, amazing stories. I'm curious, what is some of the wisdom that you can share with us as hiring managers or interviewers now that you're on the other side of the table? I'm curious how your experiences have shaped your practices of hiring new people for your team.
Who wants to take that one?
I've got a lot of thoughts about this, but I'll try to keep it to like one. I think that you need to put yourself in the shoes of a candidate. I've talked to a lot of companies, and when I talk to them about the way that they do their search, I ask them, have you gone through the application process? Like, have you gone through, are you eating your own dog food? And it's shocking how infrequent they are, and so they don't know some of the hitches in the process because they're not going through it themselves. Yeah. I went through it several thousand times, so I'm happy to tell you later.
All right.
And
we got time
I'd like to add to that.
Go right ahead.
That even when you are going through the process, I think it's really important to continuously solicit feedback from groups that you don't necessarily see much representation of in the process. So whether it's people coming from other countries, whether it's minority communities that already exist within this country, we already know that there's a lot of underrepresentation in what goes through a lot of these tracking systems. So how can we also extend beyond, maybe it's through more candidate personas, that we make sure the reach goes even further, and then everything in the process kind of becomes conducive to making that kind of turn into a successful hire.
And I would just add one more thing. I think the thread between all of these answers and all of your talks is that empathy piece, right? Like, just, I know it seems like common sense, just putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, but we have bots and we have this amazing technology, and then we forget to do like the basic human response to just empathize with somebody. So.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree. Well, I'm sure there's tons more questions, and that leads me right into us starting into our next activity, which will be an amazing Smarty Party, right? But before we do that, I want to say thank you guys all again. Can we give them a round of applause?